Elizabeth. It's part of our up-to-the-minute panel discussions, and we'll be discussing what happened, which seems like a big enough topic unto itself, but then we're supposed to have some time for what's coming up next. I'm pleased today to have 4 wonderful panelists, some of them from here at Princeton and others who are visiting. Deb Amos, I'm sure a familiar voice, if also a familiar face, who's a correspondent for National Public Radio. Deb's expertise includes the Middle East. She's won numerous awards for her reporting there. You can hear her often on Weekend Edition and All Things Considered, among other formats. Next to Deb is our own Ali Valenzuela. Ali's an assistant professor of politics. His specialties include Latino politics and U.S. elections. Next to Ali, we have Sam Popkin visiting us from UCSD, the University of California at San Diego. Sam is an expert on presidential politics and elections. Among other topics, his books, which you may be familiar with, include The Candidate, What It Takes to Win and Hold the White House. And this next one was planned even ahead of the events, the Republican Crackup and the Future of Presidential Politics. So his editors are trying to get that out the door very quickly. Finally, on my right, or to the left of me for you, I have my own chair, Nolan McCarty, who's a professor in the politics department as well as the Woodrow Wilson School. Nolan's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He's written extensively on elections, gerrymandering, U.S. politics. One of his more recent books is Political Bubbles, Financial Crises, and the Failure of American Democracy. But I think he has some other pessimistic news that he plans to share with us today. So a few ground rules for today. We're going to have each of the panelists speak individually and give us some insights about what happened as well as what's next. This panel is live streamed to alumni and others who are watching. In addition, we will have a live Twitter feed, WooLection16. You can see the hashtag above. We will take questions both from the live audience as well as from alumni and others who are live streaming in. Rose Huber of our communications office will be handing them to me. If you're here and you are not a Twitter user, this is the Twitter presidency, so you're going to have to move into that. But
get on board.
Yes, but you don't have to. You can raise your hand, and we will also call on you that way. We'll be going in alphabetical order. Deb, if you'd lead us off.
It's probably not the right place to start foreign policy after this election, but hey, I'm the Amos, and so this is what we're going to do. We're in the Woodrow Wilson School, so for all of you who are interested in foreign policy, I would say put on your seatbelts. There's a lot that we don't know. You know, on domestic policy, on every conceivable issue, voters had a very stark choice between these two candidates. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump not only disagreed on just about everything, they also disagreed on the reality that you use to make policy prescriptions. I mean, you know that in this election, even facts were in dispute. We saw the same thing in foreign policy, very far apart between these two candidates. As Foreign Policy magazine pointed out, one candidate is advocating a forceful U.S. foreign policy, strengthening international relations, confronting Russia, and stopping the spread of nuclear weapons. The other candidate was the Republican. So how are we to understand foreign policy under President Trump? I mean, should we take the advice of a Silicon Valley billionaire who supported the president? And he said something that I actually think about a lot. He says the media always has taken Trump literally, but never seriously, and Trump voters take Trump seriously, but not literally. So keep that in mind when you watch these policies unfold. I think what we have to say is the president is going to be defined by who he appoints, and that's what we've been all watching this week. And that roster still remains a shifting cast of characters. So my fundamental question is, how is he going to address what are immediate and complex challenges that he's going to inherit on the first day that he takes office? This is a candidate who really didn't articulate any detailed foreign policy vision. But there are no do-overs in foreign policy. And for this president, these challenges are daunting, dangerous, I'd say the most in modern US history. And here is the dramatic list. You have the fight against ISIS. Already, the US military and allies are engaged in trying to take back the city of Mosul in Iraq. That tempo increases every day. You have Syria's, what seems to be the intractable civil war. You have a newly aggressive Russia. US officials say that Russia directly intervened in the American electoral process. And we have Korea. There's a good chance that in President Trump's first year of office, North Korea will have a missile-mounted nuclear weapon capable of reaching to US borders. And of course, last and certainly not least, there's Iran. Iran has been energized by an agreement to curtail its nuclear weapons. You can already see in Europe, that the Germans and the French are leading the way to open up trade with Tehran. Candidate Trump said that he would tear up the nuclear agreement. He said it was the worst deal that he had ever seen. And because it's an executive agreement, it's not a treaty, he actually has the power to do it on day one. He could do it. The problem is that two can play that game, and there are hardliners in Iran who are itching for the president to do exactly that, who want to restart a nuclear program. It was interesting to me this week that a spokesman, not an official, but a spokesman for the Saudi government, Prince Turki Al Faisal, actually called on President-elect Trump not to tear up the agreement. And this was a country that was certainly against it. But without anything in its place, I think those who were against the treaty are beginning to rethink what would happen on the day that it went. There are also 5 other countries that worked to implement that agreement who have said nothing about tearing it up. In fact, are very happy that we have a 15-year hiatus to any possible nuclear program in Tehran. Trump also said he was determined to reverse American policy in Syria. He says the only thing that we need to do in Syria is to fight ISIS. And he's been suggesting that perhaps it might work better if there was an alliance with Russia and even with the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad, who made public statements yesterday, saying that he thought that Trump would be a good ally against terrorism. Now, the day after Donald Trump's first telephone meeting with Vladimir Putin, the Russians unleashed a brutal air campaign in eastern Aleppo. Today, 80 civilians died, and the only children's hospital in East Aleppo was destroyed. This is yesterday, Congress passed what's called the Caesar Bill, and it was an overwhelming vote in the House to sanction the Syrian regime as well as Russia and Iran for war crimes. So already you can see that there are conflicts within the Republican side on just how these policies are going to be carried out. So we only have hints so far about foreign policy. Improve relations with Moscow, a quick victory over ISIS, perhaps restoring torture as one of the tools for American security policy, extended vetting for any Muslim immigrant who comes to this country. It's possible that he walks some of this back. It's possible that we should not take him literally. But we're only really going to know where he stands by who he names. And we still don't know, but we have to watch who he names for these crucial Middle East posts. Now, this transition comes at a time when the national security community, which includes many Republicans, denounced their party's candidate. They said he was unfit for office. And now they're weighing whether they should serve. There are 2 poles in the argument. One is from Elliot Cohen, who is a former official under Bush. He now is a professor of international relations. He found out the power of Twitter this week when he made one tweet, which went viral, advising anybody who was thinking about serving this president to stay away. They are arrogant, he said, and all they care about is that they won. On the other side, you have Brent Scowcroft. He is a pillar of the Republican national security establishment, and it's been reported that he made an impassioned plea at a lunch this week in Washington for people, both Republicans and Democrats, to think about country over party and to serve this administration. The question is, will this old establishment be allowed into government? I want to conclude with telling you a story about Iran. This was the first time that Iranians could watch US presidential debates, broadcast live in Tehran. It's also the first time that the first season of Netflix, House of Cards, played across the country. And if you remember that first season, Frank Underwood was scheming and running for president. And he had an infamous line in that first season, and it was, "Democracy is so underrated." And that is now a much quoted line in Iranian social media as they watch and as we watch to find out what kind of foreign policy we will see from Washington after January. Thank you.
Ali?
Oh, we're not going alpha. Okay.
It's the A's.
All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. As someone who studies race and ethnic politics, with the focus specifically on Latino, Latina, and Latinx identified individuals, Americans, and immigrants, there's a lot I can say about this election, and I'm happy to take questions about it. But if you're going to remember one thing about what I have to say here today, I hope it'll be this. The exit polls are wrong about Latinos and minority voters, okay? The exit poll, it's a survey. There's nothing official about it, and a consortium of media networks, they pay millions of dollars to conduct this survey. So one thing you should ask yourself is, why don't they ever discuss some of these criticisms that I'm about to mention, okay? And why don't they ever look at or present to you alternative data sources for the preferences of subgroups like Latinos, like African Americans, like Latinos? So look, the stated purpose of the exit polls is to represent the vote nationally. And they admit themselves that it's not intended to represent the views of racial and ethnic minorities. And the reason is because of their sampling strategy. So what they do is about 2/3 of their sample comes from just a handful of precincts within states. And because they're trying to represent the national vote, they end up skipping most majority minority precincts where poorer citizens who have more limited English language skills where they live. And that means they don't even have the opportunity to be in the exit poll, okay? But you don't hear this reported. Part of what you also don't hear is somewhere on the order of 48% of Latinos live in majority Latino neighborhoods, right? And so another question you might ask is, did half of their Latino sample come from these majority Latino precincts?
0.
Right. We actually don't know the answer to that, though.
Well, they got two of the 5 districts in one region were Cuban anyway.
Fair enough, but it's a very low number, right? So what this means is that the exit poll, it skews very heavily towards more educated, wealthier, and English-dominant respondents. For example, in the exit poll that's from this year, 44% of non-white respondents, minority respondents, are reported to have a college degree. The actual number is closer to 30%. So why does this matter? Like, this sounds like methodological minutia, but it's not. Prior research very consistently shows that Latinos and other minorities who are less integrated, who are Spanish dominant, who are less wealthy, in other words, those who have a more tenuous hold on this society, tenuous status in this society, they are consistently systematically more liberal and more democratic in their vote preferences. So overrepresenting wealthier English-dominant respondents means that these exit polls are systematically biased against the very constituents that I'm talking about. Right? They're overrepresenting wealthier and English-dominant Latinos, Asian Americans, African Americans. And that's going to systematically bias the results of the exit polls towards Republicans. And that's exactly what we saw in this poll. I've also seen survey evidence that actually paints a very different picture. So this survey was conducted using sampling strategies that we actually know to produce representative samples that allows Latinos, Asian Americans, African Americans, all of these individuals within states to have at least a chance of getting into the survey. And when you do that, when you do a proper sampling strategy, what you end up with is at least 10 percentage points lower support for Trump. So I'm seeing figures closer to 18 and 19% among Latinos voting for Trump, and about 5 points greater support, and that's about 5 points, sorry, that's about 5 points lower support among Latinos than Mitt Romney received among this group, right? So the idea that about 2 percentage points more Latinos were supporting Trump over Romney is just false. We could look at another question that was also asked both in 2012 and in 2006 that asked explicitly about open hostility towards the Latino community. In 2012, about 18% of Latinos said that Romney was openly hostile towards the Latino community. In 2016, that figure is closer to 55%. Right? So it defies reason to believe that a 37 percentage point increase in the share of Latinos who say that the Republican candidate is openly hostile towards their community, that actually led to an increase in Latino support for Trump. I've also I'm on a project that's helped collect precinct level data where we only look at 90% plus precincts that have 90% or more Latino voters. And in these precincts, we're seeing the same figures that we're finding in the survey. So if we look at real turnout data from this election, we're seeing numbers that are verified by a survey with better methodology. So why am I focused on this? I'm focused on this because Latinos, Blacks, Asian Americans, and other minority voters will not be scapegoated or should not be scapegoated in this election. They supported Clinton in record numbers. They showed up to vote in record numbers. So any talk at all about abandoning these voters in favor of some rightward shift towards the Democrats, some rightward shift by the Democrats, it's frankly electoral malpractice, and it's going to doom the Democrats to future losses. So I do think there's some reckoning that needs to be made with respect to white middle-class voters, right, who did in large numbers shift away from Obama and towards Trump. And I think there needs to be policies that address the needs of white middle-class voters. But ultimately, left-leaning economic populism, it's a winning platform. Obama showed the way forward on that, and he campaigned relentlessly on how his policies benefited the middle class. We didn't see that with candidate Clinton, not to the extent that Obama pushed on this particular issue and this particular framing of his policies. The last thing that I want to focus on is that our president-elect, he's not normal, and his campaign promises, his campaign behavior, it's not okay. So as educators, I think we have a responsibility to call hateful rhetoric for what it is. Essentialist attacks that Paul Ryan, the Republican leader of the House of Representatives, he called it the textbook definition of racism. He happened to be saying this with respect to Trump's attack against a Mexican-American judge born in Indiana, who he claimed couldn't do his job because of his ethnic background. But it could equally apply to Trump's attacks against Muslim Americans, who he said were harboring terrorists, or at least suggested as much, to African Americans, who he suggested are living in hell, or Asian Americans, who one of his supporters recently said has too many CEOs in Silicon Valley. Right? These are things ideas and comments that we should actively reject. I also want to suggest, though, that we have a responsibility to explain that his locker room talk is in fact sexual harassment and a fireable offense in most workplaces. And I'm actually just talking about the talk, right? Not the actual behavior, right? As we know, that behavior is sexual assault. And over a dozen women have come out to confirm that his talk was actually more than just talk, right? And so this isn't a case of he said, she said, right? This is a case of he said, and they confirmed, right? So now, at the same time, I think as educators, we also have a responsibility to push our students to demand research and answers to what happened, right? And what they can do next. So I'm thinking about questions like, why did, in fact, white middle-class voters vote for someone who used the rhetoric that I just mentioned and engage in other sorts of behavior of this kind? How do we motivate young people to turn out and vote more consistently? This is a perennial problem, but we don't have good answers to this. And I think last, and this is really crucial, why do certain politicians and their supporters advocate for the disenfranchisement of thousands of eligible voters when there is exactly zero evidence of systematic voter fraud? Right? Voting rights are human rights, and to systematically deny our citizens their right to vote, I would suggest, is frankly un-American.
Thanks, Ali. Sam? So Sam Popkin.
Let me just say, having for 8 years assisted on the exit poll writing and analysis at CBS for the CBS New York Times polls, Ali is right, and the exit polls are even off on every demographic group. I wrote a paper with the person who runs the American Elections Project showing that the errors in the exit polls are biased towards younger people, far more educated, far more affluent, far more willing to answer polls. And the soul searching going on about why the polls all had the same bias of missing the 0 point in the election, assuming Clinton was a point or two higher, apparently has something to do with that too, but that soul searching is going on right now. And what you've heard from Ali is a very perfectly phrased part of what will be, in a few years, the very big battle in the Democratic Party between what kind of populism and what the future will be. I was part of these battles in the 80s over the Mondale-Hart to Clinton, and was it the right way or the wrong way? And I'm glad to have somebody stating it so clearly and accurately. Just a dose of reality in this that I never, I've written about elections. I've been in the middle of the Democratic presidential strategy and targeting group for McGovern, Carter, Clinton, and Gore. I did Ronald Reagan in the practice debates. I never thought I would have to read Breitbart and learn about Alex Jones to cover an election. And to give you a sense of, just so you get things together, since Breitbart got on the Donald Trump bandwagon, the unique number of visitors per month of Breitbart is now equal to NPR online. And Alex Jones has more listeners, his audience is bigger than Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck combined. I never thought as long as I lived, Glenn Beck and I would vote for the same presidential candidate. Now, I'm here today because I have so much respect for two people at Princeton, Brandice and Nolan, and I'm writing a book about crack-ups, and I said, I couldn't come in 2012 when you wanted me to come. I was giving a talk, 8 or 12, one of them, it was China, and I said, I will come if you'll read some of my draft. And it was worth it. And I wanted to make sure I praised a few Princeton people, because now I want to talk about the most valuable player in getting Donald Trump the nomination. I want to give an honest and fair shout out to Senator Ted Cruz for making Donald Trump possible. And I am not being facetious or snarky about Princeton because I went to MIT. My wife spent a year here. She says her year as abroad, because she was one of the 15 women here in the critical languages program before Princeton was co-ed. And it was fun to be one of the 15 women at Princeton, I can assure you. That was before I knew her. When I say that, three years ago, when Senator Cruz got to Washington, and you give a talk at a university or a group like this, and the first question you get, no matter what the subject is, was always, is Hillary going to win? That was always the first question, no matter who you called on. And I said, for 3 years, I said, it depends on how much damage Ted Cruz does to the Republican Party. And by that I meant, you only win a third term in the White House when the party is really, the other party is a mess. The total logjam about doing anything about popular worries about crime and immigration, crime and welfare in the 80s put Mike Dukakis on the spot for a party that had no answers, just the way Mitt Romney went from a feared candidate to a wuss after the Tea Party put him through the ringer after 2009. And it was Ted Cruz more than any person who destroyed the possibility of the Republican Party making any headway on immigration, gay rights and marriage, or women's rights. And those were the three issues that were tiptoed around in the Barber Commission report, trying to find out what the party could do to enlarge the party after the shock of 2012. And he used the most innovative tactics in the party, and you can describe it all with two Time magazine stories. Marco Rubio was on the cover of Time magazine in February of 2013, a full-page picture with the headline, "The Republican Savior." Marco Rubio was not just going to be the Hispanic by the door. Marco Rubio was going to lead the party into finding an acceptable solution to the immigration issue that would resolve things for the party and bring back the very respectable amount of Hispanic votes that Ronald Reagan used to get in California before the Pete Wilson days, and that W got in Texas with the argument that if they're in America, I want them to get an education and become good citizens. And today, as a result of the mess we're in, I just have to say, I'm in San Diego. There are 85,000 children born in America now living in Tijuana going to school because their parents had to leave the country already before the election. Across the board, the Tijuana school system is bursting at the seams with 85,000 Mexican parents with American children transferring from the schools in California into Tijuana as we speak. And the first part of the year, it's Rubio the Savior. At the end of the year, Ted Cruz was one of the 10 people in the world nominated for Person of the Year. I mean, you'll be relieved to know that Pope Francis won, not Senator Cruz. But the story about Cruz was not that he's a great man, but never has anybody done so much damage to their party as Ted Cruz. And the blurb was, right now the party would have him walking the plank, except the plank is already underwater thanks to the trouble he's made. When he won in Texas as the outside Tea Party candidate, destroying the Texas party establishment of the Republican who wants to do business in Washington and bring bacon back to the state, the Club for Growth, the Tea Party, and everybody else said on a scale of 1 to 10, this is an 11. And as one Republican strategist, the professor at the University of Texas said, this is the first Tea Party person who doesn't forget the third point when they're giving a talk. I mean, and from the day he got there, he was working evangelical Iowa with his father. He left the gays in hell to his father and just took the slightly more polite lines, but they were really working the brimstone. His father went on a national tour with the head of the Heritage Foundation to try and stop Obamacare, which was a plan to control our lives along with gun control. And just one small example of what he would do to embarrass his colleagues, using the ability to call for a vote on the record. Before he was in Congress, before he was in the Senate 2 months, there was a bill to fund the United Nations. You know, it's controversial, but everybody knows you better do it. So they have a voice vote. Cruz insisted on a vote on the record on an amendment he introduced. And the amendment was zero money for the United Nations if any member country has a forced abortion policy. Now, we know the United Nations has nothing to do with the abortion policies of the countries, and he knew it was going to pass, but it forced Rand Paul and Marco Rubio to vote for the amendment, along with a few other senators who thought they'd be killed in the primary by Tea Party people if they didn't. And he had this uncertainty, this concern that everybody thought he's the mad dog in the Senate, that he got the House to go along with him. He said, if you shut down, the Senate will have to go with you. And by the end, when he read Green Eggs and Ham, it was all phony. It was going to be solved the next day. But if you don't think he touched a spark, the Ted Cruz Saves America coloring book at Amazon sold 40,000 copies the first week and was the #1 coloring book for 20 weeks at Amazon. Sold hundreds of thousands of copies, and it's not a right-wing company. It's a company that also, their other 2 ones were My Gay Father and one about the President Obama. So it wasn't even his doing, but this is how he started it. And this opened the door for Donald. Is it my 5 minutes? Am I going to?
It's more like your 8 minutes.
Okay. This opened the door for Donald Trump. People don't. I hate to ever give credit to a difficult person, a bad person, a person I would not want in my house as long as I live. And I don't even like the word anymore. Donald Trump is brilliant at coining phrases and sensing a trend. He put his toe in the water to run in 1987, 1999, 2011, and 2015, and then he did it. And I don't think anybody I know understood until later when I studied him that his whole 6-week blitz on Obama's not an American was establishing his credentials with the voters he wanted to reach. The issue was not, is he actually an American, but is he what we want an American to be? Is he our kind of American? It's like when I say, oh no, he's no intellectual, about somebody with a PhD, because I think they're schlocky and silly. And this was very important. And somebody who knows so little about the party, about policies, about triads, about the world, somebody like that only wins when the party has such a big log jam that nobody can get through it who tries to deal with things. He started warning the party 10 years before he ran that anybody who thinks they can win an election cutting Medicare is crazy. He warned about that when there was a special election several times when you could see the issue was Medicare. He warned. He is the only single candidate who said anything about spending more money on Medicare and veterans. Every other discussion was about saving entitlements by cutting them or privatizing entitlements. All of this was ignoring the issue that he's the only one who got to in the party. And when somebody like this does, look, anybody alive who reads polls could tell from the Pew polls by 2000 2014 that the evangelicals had given up on stopping gay marriage. A quarter of them supported it. A quarter of them said it's too late to do anything about it. So half of them are already off the table of believing you can do it. And they'd already voted twice overwhelmingly for statewide lotteries and video poker in South Carolina. So this notion that they're all going to march in a herd is a kind of, I don't know if the word is racism, but it's an ignorance on the part of people who aren't evangelicals to understand that if a Jew doesn't have to love Netanyahu, an evangelical doesn't have to love Ted Cruz. And this was a big deal that he cut through this way. Every other Republican policy was stopped because they couldn't accept amnesty. Now, and Ted Cruz was the man who said, legal is good, illegal is bad. His policy is exactly the same as Donald Trump's, but he hid the fact that there would have to be deportation, thinking it would kill him in the main event. And Trump outbid him. He called his bluff. He said, we deport him. He took the Ann Coulter line, and Megyn Kelly said to Cruz in an interview, well, Senator, your policy is exactly the same as Donald Trump's. You say no citizenship and no amnesty, so you mean deportation. And he said, Megyn, you're just asking the question all the liberals want to ask. Why are you asking a liberal mainstream question? He hid the thing that Donald Trump said. And that was the difference. Michael Tesler and others have shown in the research, everybody who was for Social Security, even if it meant taxing more, and everybody who was for immigration flocked to him. Now, it's still a crack-up even though they own, this is my last two sentences, the Republicans have the House, the Senate, and the White House. It's still a crack-up. Paul Ryan's A Better Way for the Party, the united platform for the party, omits the words Medicare, immigration, and foreign trade. What did our president promise to do? Strengthen Medicare, change foreign trade, and deport and change immigration. None of the problems have been solved. This has happened before, with Eisenhower stiffing Taft to come in as the internationalist and blocking the blockade America type, the America First, and with Jimmy Carter, who walked over everything. Carter was killed by 4 years of battles with Ted Kennedy, and Eisenhower survived because he gave Lyndon Johnson domestic policy, and Lyndon Johnson gave him everything I cared about with NATO and the United Nations. We don't know what'll happen this time, but the Democrats, you'll notice, have already said, we'll help you with the infrastructure, because the Republicans have already said that it's not worth doing. It's inefficient, unneeded. Sorry. How long did I end up?
15 minutes.
Sorry.
Nolan.
You're right, great. So when I agreed to serve on this panel, I really expected I'd be doing a talk somewhat like Sam's, that I'd be doing a postmortem on the contemporary Republican Party. The remarks would have focused on how a weak party establishment was unable to prevent a candidate with no electoral experience, very low overall approval numbers, to defeat a field of 16 experienced and accomplished public servants. I would then be trying to forecast whether or not the GOP could ever recover from such a debacle. But it's clear now, I and many others missed a really important part of the story. That is, our fixation with the Republican Crackup covered up a tremendous hollowing out of the Democratic Party. So in my comments, I just want to highlight some areas in which I think the weaknesses, the fundamental weaknesses of the Democratic Party contributed as much to the outcome of this election as the strengths and popularity of Donald Trump. First of all, and this is an obvious point, going into the election, the Democratic Party establishment had converged on a single candidate to an extent that no party had ever done for a non-incumbent candidate. It was almost certain that the party establishment was going to support Hillary Clinton, and no one believed that there would be any serious opposition until a socialist senator from Vermont changed his party registration and entered the primary. So here we have a situation in which a candidate from an established party in which all the elites had converged got pushed to the very end by someone who had not been part of that party establishment at all in the past. And then, of course, as we know, the contest between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders revealed really fundamental disagreements within the Democratic Party. Pulled her to the left on some issues, in particular trade, her support for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, minimum wage, and other issues, and caused a rift between, I'll come back to this in a second, between the kind of business Democratic community and the kind of economic progressives. Another point. So as we know, WikiLeaks really hurt the campaign in pretty direct ways by revealing the sort of secrets that no campaign wants to have revealed. But I think the WikiLeaks also revealed that the campaign and the Democratic National Committee has some competence in disorganizational issues that they're going to have to deal with going forward. And then we don't know for sure, because of many of the reasons that Ali mentioned with the kind of difficulties in the polling, but it appears that poor mobilization of key party constituencies did play an important role in her defeat, at least in particular states. And I think we can come back to that, and Ali and I might have slightly different views on that, and we can come back to that question and answer. It's important to note, and I think more fundamental to thinking about the future of the Democratic Party and what role it might play during the Trump years, is that these are not new problems. Over many years, we've seen some very difficult challenges that the party has faced. It's worth noting that the party is a very loose coalition of a variety of groups. These groups include wealthy liberals, wealthy liberal business people for the most part, the professional class, a variety of ethnic and racial groups, as well as the adherents of particular progressive social movements, including those on the environment and gender rights. The reason why this hollowing out of the Democratic Party didn't receive as much attention is because President Obama was uniquely able to hold this coalition together. He had the personality and the political skills to appeal to all of these groups. Not always for the same reasons. I think a lot of these groups read into President Obama their vision of what a leader of the Democratic Party should be, but he was uniquely able to do that. But over the course of his administration, he was either unwilling or unable to create durability for that coalition. There's been a lot written, in particular a very good piece in the Washington Post today by a political scientist named Daniel Galvin about the lack of attention that President Obama played to party building over the course of his 2 terms. As has been mentioned earlier, I think a central issue for the Democratic Party, both in this election and previous years, is that it's largely given up trying to get the support of white working class voters. They seem to have concluded that such voters can only be mobilized by appeals to religion, culture, or particular grievances. And there perhaps is some truth to that, and as Ali mentioned, there can be some good reasons why a Democratic Party doesn't want to mobilize people on those grounds. And it may well be true that someday the Democrats can win easily without such voters, but until they figure out how to do it, they're going to be at a very large disadvantage in the Electoral College, as we've seen, and more specifically in the House of Representatives. Yes, they are the national plurality party based on the coalition they have, but our system is based on a federal bargain. Whether it's one that we should keep or shouldn't keep, that's a debate for another day. But as long as we have a system that's based on federally based representation, a party that cannot win, whether it be states or districts, without substantial support for ethnic, racial minorities, is likely to be a minority party within several institutions. Let me just talk about some other pieces of evidence for the Democratic Party structural problems, which I think make it was going to make it very difficult for them to play kind of a constructive role in kind of shaping the agenda over the next 4 years. The first is the utter collapse of the Democratic Party at the state level. As many of you may know, as of right now, the Democratic Party holds 18 of 50 governorships. That is that's an extremely low number. Again, when we have this basis of federalism, the inability to be competitive across the board means that there are going to be fewer and fewer states that are governed by Democratic governors. Only 13 states is it true that the Democrats control both houses of the state legislature, and there are only 5 in which they share with the Republicans. So there's been a complete hollowing out over the past 8 years in the effectiveness of the Democratic Party in the states. They also perform very poorly during midterm elections, the inability to kind of persistently mobilize voters in presidential and off-year elections. There are good reasons why they have a bigger challenge there, but their inability to confront that challenge and solve it has been a particularly important problem. It's worth remembering that 2010, an off-year election, which led to an overwhelming win by the Republicans in the House of Representatives, may well be the source of kind of continuing problems based on changes in redistricting at the states and in certain election laws. But the Democrats have also seen fall-offs in turnout participation in the 2014 midterm election, which helped solidify that. And that becomes a long-term problem for the Democratic Party because their members are much more vulnerable because of these turnout swings. They're less likely to get seniority, incumbency, the things that are kind of necessary to kind of combat the Republican advantages. And then third, there's a lot of evidence that the Democratic Party is very poor at recruiting candidates for state legislative office and for congressional office. And if you think about the kind of sources of the Republican Party advantage in state legislatures and Congress, there are really 3 parts. We can argue about what ratios to give these 3 parts. The one is the geographic advantage that the Republican Party has, given the weaknesses of the Democratic Party in terms of white, middle class, and working class votes, the weaknesses of the Democratic Party outside of the cities. That's one important part of it. I tend to dismiss this often, but there's reason to believe that some partisan gerrymandering is at play. But another thing that's I kind of think less known is that the Democrats dramatically underperform in close races. In 2012, the Democrats would have picked up 10 more seats if their House candidates had run just as well as President Obama had done. There had become a persistent pattern of Democratic House candidates, especially in the pivotal seats, of running behind their presidential candidates. And I argue that's a lack of attention to building up the Democratic Party and the view that the Democratic Party has decided that they're a presidential party and they put all their eggs in that basket, and now that basket has been smashed, and there are going to be some repercussions from that going forward.
Bring back Rahm Emanuel. You nailed it. By the way, you've got to look at Rudy Ayer's book. You have to look at the chart.
Thanks. Before we open it up to the floor, we're going to cut the moderator questions from 2 to 1 to give all of our participants time or as many as possible to ask questions. So on this, please limit your answer to 1 minute if you can. I know.
Is there
so
a buzzer?
how much? Yeah. Well, I think so that people have a bit of a preview of what's next. How much will Trump reshape the Republican Party versus how much will the Republican Party now reshape Trump? Nolan, would you like to?
So one of the things I've been paying a lot of attention to, because I've written in the past about presidential transitions. Presidential transitions are always a little bit messy. There's lots of conflict, jockeying over this position versus that position. This time is appearing more messy because obviously they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to keep secrets. Even though they've kicked all the media out of Trump Tower, it doesn't prevent leaks and the floating of this candidate versus that candidate. But one thing that seems quite clear is that every single appointment in the new administration is going to boil down to whether it goes to a Bannonite or, I guess, a Prebicite, I guess, would be the opposite. So there is a real battle, I think, between establishment republicanism and the kind of, we'll call it Trumpism. The thing that the establishment republicanism has going for it is that they do have experience and capacity. There is a policy community among establishment and conservative Republicans. Those people will be needed to staff the administration, and so that's an advantage. The disadvantage is it's not clear that the people on the other side of the equation understand the importance of that experience and that policy-making capacity. And so we will see, throughout this transition process, a zig and a zag between the Bannonites and the Prebicites. And it's not quite clear where it will come down. I do think on some issues, as has been mentioned, infrastructure, the Trumpists will win. But on many other kind of more orthodox conservative policies, I think the establishment will be able to reassert itself.
This time I will keep it under the minute. There's going to be very big conflict in general because legislators make their name on the far left or the far right to stand out. Presidents need to own the center to get reelected and get stuff done. When it comes to trade and treaties, he's got enormous power in the regulations and the ability to just say, we're breaking the treaty and we're not going to enforce this or we're going to enforce that. So he has enormous international bomb throwing ability. When it comes to domestic policy and anything inside the country, he is now a senator with 16 votes. If he likes it, it takes 50 senators to deliver. If he doesn't like it, it takes 67. And that's going to be a shock for him the way it was when he got the nomination and said everybody should treat me like Caesar. And they just ignored him.
Thanks. Ali?
Yeah, so I think it's right to hope that our institutional checks and balances will provide some measure of moderation to the policies and proposals that Trump made during the campaign. But him and Bannonites, they won, right? And I can't help but think that will embolden not just all the hate that we see happening, in our communities, but in fact, candidates who otherwise, representatives who otherwise would have stayed away from these more extreme policies that you both don't really foresee, and unleash them, allow them to espouse those same views and to go forward, right? I think elections do have consequences.
I think it's harder to say in foreign policy because so little is known. I think we have to wait till we see who the nominees are. However, I don't think that the candidate thought very clearly about foreign policy. It was never really his thing. Henry Kissinger is at Trump Tower today. So yes, he has enormous power to stop trade agreements and to rip up the Iranian nuclear deal. He also has to deal with allies, and Congress, I think, will be on his case. You already see that.
Thank you for those insightful answers. So we have questions from the audience, as well as, Rose is telling me to ask them from Twitter. All right. Okay. Okay. I'm just reading it. These are now not my questions.
Is there a God?
It may seem as if I'm criticizing some of the panelists. Okay.
Given the questions beforehand?
No, I'm reading them as they come in. Punditry and the media got so much wrong in analyzing this election. How can we trust it? Deb?
I think that's a very good question.
Okay.
And in newsrooms across the country, certainly in mine, we're asking a lot of questions about how our coverage went. I think it's wrong to have a complete beat up of the media, honestly. Certainly our correspondents were out there. But I think we have some work to do. And I think every news organization knows that.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so I've my students in the room know this, but I've been railing against the profit-driven, controversy-driven media for a long time now, and I think public media needs to be better supported. I think we need to pay for our subscriptions to long-form journalism, to investigative journalism. I haven't turned on the cable news since Tuesday. I would come home and that would be the first thing that I would turn to, just partly as filler, partly to catch up on the day's events. But I can't stomach watching them because I do think they failed us as a country, and I think they, in large part, feed off of the controversy that we've seen. I suggested that they're not covering the errors in the polls, and I would suggest that one of the reasons is because, in fact, it feeds into the controversy to report the incorrect numbers.
Okay. Yes, one from the audience.
Can you address the impact of Comey on the outcome of this election?
I can do that. No, I can talk about the last round in the last 2 weeks that clearly took a point off the spread between the candidates. I was about to get and send to Allie after we get out of here the very good podcast that the pollsters who did all the super PAC work for Secretary Clinton did, and talked about the best estimate of what happened in that period. I mean, there is no doubt that might have made the last difference. I cannot say what states yet or what, something like that with the polling, but clearly much of the drop after the debates is because Hillary Clinton has always looked best in comparison with a person not on her own being valued on a pedestal. But that had stopped and everything was stable until the last Comey round. And there's clearly some very complicated stories that hopefully Woodward will have someday about how it happened, but that's a different world than I can address with you. I can just say clearly a point.
One from Twitter. I will rotate. Can any of you comment on Clinton winning top income voters? And do you consider Democrats still the working class party? Are the Republicans now the working class party? Sam?
Still, but very still.
Okay. Nolan?
Yeah, I haven't looked, because I'm as skeptical of exit polls as Ali. I tend not to look at the income level breakdowns of the exit polls. So I think that's something that we're just going to have to wait and see to the extent to which that's true. Many people have thought that the Democrats have been winning top incomes for a long time, but if you look at the better polls, that's not been true. So I think I'm a little skeptical. I mean, it's important to note one of the central issues in American politics when we talk about income is when we talk about the distribution of income was within whites. Latinos, African Americans, they're working class too. They're low incomes. The Democratic Party tries to appeal to those interests. I still believe the Democratic Party is there. It's just an inability. Perhaps there are disadvantages because of the media and other things, but the inability to convince similarly situated whites that those interests are their interests too, and that's where they've got to go. I don't think they've really changed their economic policies, but they haven't marketed them to a set of voters that they need to market them to.
Yes.
So I have a question kind of about the university and other related institutions in this. So walking around on Wednesday, the level of shock that was present in everybody's faces, listening to the media and other types of things, it was amazing. No one ever saw this coming. So in other words, we missed half the country. And I wonder what that means.
The Republicans were shocked too.
Yes, they were.
Yes. So my question is, what does it say about our commitment to diversity as an institution, other elite institutions, that we are so not diverse that half of the country was unrepresented here, such that there's not a core group like me, not a Trump voter, I don't know anybody, who voted here, and there's not enough people here that they feel comfortable saying this is who we are, this is what we believe. So what does it say about our commitment to diversity as an institution, both at Princeton, the universities, the media, that there's not representation of a lot of Americans?
Sam?
I could not agree more how much better off the university would be. In 1960, the faculties of the Ivy League schools were divided with a slight advantage to Nixon and the schools. There are very few scientists who can be Republican anymore, and that starts to change a whole culture with the cultural ferment going on, that it's harder, and especially with the secular religious divide. And it's a problem because it's very hard sometimes to get an understanding of the diversity of evangelicals, Republicans, conservatives, anti-communists. Universities are narrow, and it is a problem. I'm not trying to change my views, but it's nice if I knew more about them. But that's totally separate from the issue of the shock this year that everybody had. The odds of Nate Silver, Trump as a 1 in 3, were exactly what the Trump campaign thought.
I just add one thing. Things could always be more diverse on ideological grounds, and I think ideological diversity is important. Princeton is a fairly ideological place. Ideologically diverse place. There are many conservatives and Republicans on the faculty among the students. But I was unable to find among them one Trump supporter. So it's a lack of even diversity within the cohorts of Republican and conservative intellectuals that there was not Trump support, and they missed it as well.
But is that a lack of ideological diversity, or just a rejection of what Trump was proposing and doing?
Deb?
I wanted to say about the media, we all decried the fact that most newspapers closed their Beijing bureau, and we didn't notice that they closed their Iowa bureau too. There is a hollowing out of the mainstream American media, and I certainly support you by saying, pay your money. If you want good journalism, you got to pay for it. We always thought it was free because it was based on an advertising model, and that has shifted now. So we are better placed than most because we do have, almost 1,000 local stations. We are in the process of bringing them into the editorial process, and we're going to need to do that because there was a lot that we didn't see because of reporting problems. But the media has been hollowed out in this country. There were only a few really good books, nonfiction, before the election. The Unraveling is one. Hannah Rosen wrote one about what was happening in the country.
Okay, from Twitter, what role do you think social media and targeted marketing played in this election? Do you think that in the end they affected the result? Or were they peripheral or epiphenomenal? Yeah.
I don't know. It's really hard to study that topic. I think it's hard to deny that social media had its heyday in this election, right? If for no other reason than the winning candidate constantly turned to it, and the media constantly covered every last tweet of his. I don't know in terms of targeted advertising.
Sam?
Well, I've been big on the simple point that it's whether it's a media. Everybody says this was the year this particular media made a difference. The big thing is, as there's more and more sources, you get more and more issues on the table and more spread, and diversity is not necessarily always something that aggregates well with fewer crazies than when you had 3 or 4 channels. You just have so many more ways people can go. Now we've got Alex Jones and Breitbart and all sorts of varieties.
And 17-year-olds in Macedonia who are using.
Pardon?
And 17-year-olds in Macedonia.
Yes, coming online and
promoting fake news.
Making fake news.
Nolan?
Yeah, just one last point. There's a lot of bluster from political consultants about their ability to precisely target this voter and know how they're going to vote before they even know how they're going to vote, and be sure and predict with precision whether they're going to vote or not. Then why do they get the polling so wrong? If they can do all that they say they can do,
well,
then nobody should have been
surprised. It was the pollsters who didn't get it.
Okay. One, maybe 2 more questions. So you had your hand up, and then the gentleman behind you. Oh,
Cruz had bragged about having the best.
Sorry, I pointed to the woman in the vest. So, yeah.
Mercer's the Jew.
I'm one of those people who take Trump both literally and seriously.
Who will literally?
And seriously.
Trump.
And I'm concerned that if he executes his policy as literally as he speaks, that we are headed in a really dangerous direction. American style Nazism, if you will. What tools do we have to stop? Or do we have any?
So this is I'm going to reinterpret it just slightly. But a sort of on what checks on executive authority, or is that? kind of into a more authoritarian style.
How bad a decision does he have to make before there's a...
Or impeachment. Nolan, your presidency scholar.
When Brandice introduced me, she made a joke about my eternal pessimism, and I've been one of the largest critics of the contemporary functioning of Congress and other branches of government. But on this, I'll be a little bit optimistic. I do think that while the Republicans control both the House and the Senate, they don't agree in lockstep with the Trump administration on many issues. There will be some issues that he is able to pursue that will make us feel very uncomfortable, but I don't think he's going to be in a position to get everything that he wants. I think the courts are also an important check, even though he will appoint the 9th Supreme Court justice, and I assume that person will get confirmed, then we're just simply back to where we were in January of last year. But the federal court system is one in which there are lots of opportunities to protect individual rights through deportation hearings and other things, and the Supreme Court can't manage it all at the same time. So I think that the judiciary, even if we end up with a Republican conservative majority in the Supreme Court, will end up being an important check on executive power, at least in the short run. And then if the American people are troubled by the exercise of executive power during his first 2 years, they will have an opportunity to vote for a different Congress who then might be able to provide some checks.
I can just say that on deporting the 11 million or the 3 million that we're down to now, except for the people who are already in prison, nobody knows where the other 10.5 million are at this moment. Even when they're appealing, if you get a hearing and it says you have to go and then you appeal it, and then if you lose the appeal, you go to the district court, and if you lose that, you go to the circuit court. And while that's going on, you don't appear. Your lawyer comes to court. And if you lose, the lawyer just has to say you lost. You're supposed to leave the country wherever you are. So this is not something that's going to happen quickly. My prayer is a year from today, Donald Trump will say, just as he did with NATO and intelligence, they got so scared they already left, so we can relax now. All the bad ones are gone, and now everybody here we can talk about because we can't find them. Because Congress is not going to fund a huge, expensive, enormous job to go around door to door yet. It's going to be very unlikely.
So I hate, again, to be the naysayer, but again, I think all of this presumes that he is going to act like a normal elected leader, right? And I think there's very little evidence to suggest that he will.
No, I don't think he's going to act like a normal leader. I just don't think he's going to get the money.
People, and I said the courts weren't going to let him do that.
I don't think he's going to have the money to do it. That's all.
But that does presume he'll accept what the courts say.
Yes, we do think that he will at that point accept what the court says.
So what I would suggest is that resistance starts now. Right? I think you don't wait until it gets so bad that you're in a situation that you don't recognize this country. I think Nolan actually identified some possible strategies, right? If the opposition party has been hollowed out at the local level, state and local level, we have New Jersey elections coming up next year. Right, so it starts in our school boards, it starts in our city councils. This is where we nurture and we groom candidates that eventually work their way up through our system of government, right? And for those of you who are worried and need something to do, I think organizing, trying to overcome what we understand to be a collective action problem to in fact resist is a really important first step.
Okay, final question. Okay, okay, yes.
God bless NPR. And given that Trump's campaign was largely content-free, okay? So one of two possibilities: either almost half the country or a quarter of the country, only quarter of the electorate voted for him. They're not serious and they don't care, or Trump's propaganda apparatus is singularly effective, or some combination of the two. woman here is concerned about is there a Reichstag fire in our future? So what is it? Is there just a complete lack of seriousness and concern on the part of a sizable fraction of the electorate? Or do the Breitbart guys, are they just such effective propagandists that, you know, Hillary's a liar and Benghazi, Trump's, I didn't use that word Trump, but squeezes out all of the time.
For all of you people who watch polls, do we know yet that there were, you know, convincing arguments that made people vote, or was this simply a let's smash the system, we're angry?
It was more about jobs with the changes vote. I mean, it's not pure race when 10 to 15% of the people in the upper Midwest were people who had voted for Obama in the past. 20% of the people in the country disliked both candidates, and Trump won them 60-40 at the end.
So I wouldn't argue that the Trump campaign was content-free. It was detail-free. But he told you lots of things he wanted to do. Build a wall, make
Hillary.
Mexico pay for it, change fundamental trade policies, re-engineer our international commitments, do infrastructure. So there were lots of things on the table. Now, I think the thing that we can worry about with the American people is that they didn't pay much attention to the details or weren't bothered by the lack of details. I think one of the difficult things that I got frustrated about in watching the advertising of my preferred candidate in this election is there was very little about her putting that type of content, the 5 or 6 things that she was really going to prioritize. I think she spent too much time personally talking about the misbehaviors of Donald Trump. That had to be done. It was important. It was important that people engage with that. But there was kind of a lack of the 6 or 7 things that people could know for sure that she was going to do on day one. And I think that actually hurt her.
This is a little point. Not only that, but if you look the whole campaign, most of what Republican elites, George Will and all the others, criticized Donald Trump on were the things that were about bad manners, uncouth statements, vulgar comments. You can go through the whole issue of the National Review, the whole issue called Against Trump. Not one person says, I hate him because he wants to spend more money on Medicare. Not one person says, we got to get rid of him because of things he wants to spend on. They all said, he's not a real conservative. That's why he won. I mean, you know, it was really telling. All the things they never criticized him for. He's vulgar, he's uncouth, he's loud, he's profane. Oh, but what about the fact he wants to raise your taxes for Medicare? That didn't count. He's just not a good conservative, and they wouldn't say why.
Thanks.
He had content.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
So unfortunately, we are out of time, but the panelists will be up here. So please, I know there were some of you who had your hands up that we couldn't get to. Thank you so much for coming, and thank the panelists.
The Ninth Circuit, you know, will never. He's not. You know, even Roosevelt with the stuff in.
Appreciate it. And I'll tell you, I think that